Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out part 2 of the Otto von Bismarck series by Extra History, which I'm very excited about. I know I always say that like I'm very excited, but I'm very excited about this. He has a kind of charisma that hops off the screen. There's very few figures in history, they're few and far between, where you're reading about them and their charisma really just hops off the page, and that's kind of the vibe that I get from Otto von Bismarck. I really get why you guys are interested in him. I don't know if I've come to a verdict on him as a human being. He's got that Ben Franklin effect, though. I really want to see what he does. And Ben Franklin is kind of like my go-to example when it comes to characters whose charisma hops off the page. Whether you like him or not, you can recognize that Benjamin Franklin lived a very full and interesting life, and those are the people that history is made for, that biography is made for. And I have high expectations for Otto von Bismarck. It's been a good start so far. So let's get this one started.
1848. The People's Spring. Springtime of Nations. The Year of Revolution.
Ooh, we're getting into the French stuff, right? I mean, we have to. I mean,
Bismarck's
it's
political
inevitable.
life ended nearly as abruptly as it started. For as the summer of 1847 began, the king, unable to get a railroad grant from the Diet without also granting a constitution, threw his hands up in the air, dissolved the Diet, and sent everybody packing. Bismarck went back home to his estate.
That's kind of disappointing. Honestly, I was hoping that we'd get a little bit more of the political drama behind that stuff. Obviously, he's going to have to get pulled back into the political field a little bit because he clearly has a long, storied career in that. But I was hoping we could get a little bit more on that issue. But nope, boom, it's out the window right off the bat. Okay, that's fine. He in a sense he wins. Like if you come in with the conservative position, you're just trying to maintain the established order a little bit more. I mean, if nothing happens, you win. If everything's still staying as it was, I guess, yeah, he wins.
Finally completed that whole business of getting married and went on his honeymoon. But as he traveled Europe, and when he returned home, he noticed a strange tension in the air, an unrest in the streets, in the cities. Then, in February 1848, Paris erupted. The monarchy fell. A republic was re-established in France. Bismarck was concerned. At home and abroad, he had seen the strain between...
And in the grand scheme of things, I'm going to go back so we can get to the beginning of that thought there. But in the grand scheme of things, the last French Revolution wasn't that long ago. So we know what happens when France starts acting up and they start having, like, all of Europe is going to get pulled into a conflict if France starts acting up. It's what happened before, so you're probably afraid it's going to happen again. So, yeah, I get it.
Bismarck was concerned. At home and abroad, he had seen the strain between the working class and those who ruled, but he never expected something so abrupt or so successful to happen in France. Then Vienna fell. Metternich, the great Austrian statesman and architect of the Concert of Europe, was displaced. This opened up an opportunity, as the Austrians had long been the dominant force among German states, but it also served as a warning. It was clear that revolution was coming to Prussia soon. But Bismarck worried that the king was too weak and too vacillating to put down a revolution. And he was right. As word of the revolution in Vienna spread, Prussians took to the streets, and soon the king promised them a constitutional government. But as the people were celebrating their victory in Berlin, the celebration turned into a clash.
Before we get to that, the king giving in to the mob is traditionally seen as a weak position. Even though you're, in a sense, serving your people, like doing what they want, like in a sense you're a representative of them. Though this isn't necessarily representative government, you're supposed to be in the position where, like, no, I know better than the common rabble. So giving in to them has not historically gone very well. If we have to go back to France for an example, once you give in a little bit, like you give an inch, they take a mile, that sort of thing. And you can agree that that mile should be taken in some of these cases, but it doesn't look good for the monarchy in that case.
As the people were celebrating their victory in Berlin, the celebration turned into a clash. Shots were fired. Government troops killed revolutionaries. Many, including Bismarck, believed that now there was no choice but to crush the revolution. The king, though, disagreed and ordered the troops out of Berlin, effectively leaving himself hostage to the revolution. And then came the first of Bismarck's good-ish ideas. He raced back to his estate and organized an old-school peasant levy. Yes, in the middle of the 19th century, he tried to press his peasants into service as their feudal lord in order to put down a revolution whose stated goals were to enfranchise and empower those same peasants. With this great idea in mind, he handed them all shotguns and said, "Come on, lads, to Berlin."
Okay, this sounds like it's gonna, like he's building it up like some good is actually gonna happen out of this. I don't know if this is completely sarcastic or not. But this sounds like an awful idea from where I sit here. I can only imagine these guns being turned against the established power at this point. Like, unless Bismarck is really good at marketing, sometimes you can convince people to fight against what is in their best interest. It happens all the time, so...
But just as they were storming off, one of his spoil-sport neighbors came out and told him to stop hurling a firebrand into the country, threatening to talk the peasants out of this nonsense. Bismarck politely replied, "You know that I am a quiet man, but if you do that, I shall shoot you." So with revolver in hand and
Sick.
four bullets in his pocket, he led his feudal levy to go liberate the king. Unfortunately, when he got to the first army camp, which was staffed by many of the conservative officers that he had come to mingle with after making his fiery speeches in Berlin, he was promptly told, "Yes, we are all a bit disappointed right now, but no, we really don't want your peasant mob messing this up even more, so how about you go send your peasants back and bring us some corn and potatoes or something?"
I mean, they're not trained military people, so I think this guy's probably making the right decision. It's like, oh, wouldn't you want to accept everybody possible? I think in this position, maybe not. I mean, to accept just a bunch of just whoever being led by this guy who seems a little too enthusiastic about this whole thing, I could see that definitely going poorly.
Not content to serve as mere fodder provider for the army, Otto then had his second good-ish idea. He left his estate and tried to sneak into Berlin again, with the cleverest of ruses, trimming his beard. Needless to say, many people saw through his incredible mind games, and soon he was laughed out of Berlin. But Bismarck was not done. He had a third good-ish idea. With the king making ever greater concessions to the revolutionaries, Bismarck saw it as his place to help elevate one of the king's relatives to the throne. So Bismarck went all in on trying to replace King Frederick Wilhelm with a confusingly but more succinctly named King Wilhelm. But Wilhelm had legged it to England, and he wasn't going to listen to this wild man anyway. So Bismarck began to hunt for a new candidate.
So he's like straight up trying to be kingmaker right now. Like, he's really like, I have to give him a little bit of credit, I guess, because he's very ambitious, very clearly hard working at this. Plenty of people would just sit back and play it safe and see how it's going. He's definitely taken a risk by putting himself out there. But like, for this guy who doesn't even seem like among the aristocracy to be the highest and mightiest, for him to go around trying to instill some sort of a new monarch, that's it's a lot. Okay, I understand that this isn't the best commentary here, but I'm kind of blown away by the fact that he's trying this. I'm just trying to think of another example. Oh god, this is weird.
Soon he found another royal relative named Charles, who proposed that his even more confusingly named son, Frederick Wilhelm, should replace Frederick Wilhelm on the throne. This Frederick Wilhelm, or Fritz, I'm going to call him Fritz, was 6 years old. But nobody had
This is
asked
very
Fritz's
confusing.
mom. I mean, they eventually did, but more as an afterthought, with Bismarck awkwardly meeting her in her servants' quarters. Not asking turned out to be a mistake, though, because Fritz's mom supported the liberals and put the kibosh on the whole thing.
Oh.
It would seem that Bismarck had made an enemy of the mother of this 6-year-old he hoped to put on the throne. Nonetheless, he was soon summoned for the
It's
second
just
Prussian
weird.
Diet, which the king had ordered assembled to hammer out how to make a real parliament for Prussia. There, Bismarck spoke passionately about the noble past that they were so casually throwing away, even becoming choked with emotion and having to stop mid-speech. But to no avail.
I think about this so much. The European attachment to tradition, and it's something that I've never been able to relate to nearly as much. I've gotten in little debates with plenty of Europeans about these sorts of institutions. Obviously, it's not quite the same. We're talking about more symbolic monarchs, more symbolic noble positions and stuff like that. But I never got that because it always felt like their mere existence just says that, okay, these people are born better than everybody else, and it seems to like perpetuate inequality. That's what my American brain says, and I feel like I'm right there, but there are plenty of Europeans who are very attached to those traditions. Like it is kind of a vehicle for culture. And dude, I don't know how to relate to that, but I am definitely trying to understand it. It's a bit of a stretch for me. I'll say that much. But I'm trying to be a little bit more sympathetic about the concept. It's weird trying to take my American values and project them upon other people. Like obviously I can't just go ahead and do that.
The Diet did its job and created the Prussian National Assembly, which Bismarck was very not elected to. This Prussian National Assembly pushed for a real parliamentary system along British lines, though, and soon the king began to lose patience with the body. So Bismarck joined the Camarilla, which was not, in fact, a secret society of vampires which has kept their presence hidden from humanity for hundreds of years, though I can understand your confusion, and let's be honest, Bismarck would have made a great vampire, but no. Bismarck joined the much more boring, but real, group of nobles and courtiers close to the king, who were determined to maintain the power of the monarchy through non-vampiric
He just hopped
means.
in like that?
And let's go ahead and call this one Bismarck's first actual good idea.
Cool. Anybody got any books on the guy? I mean, obviously there's some, like any good books that are in English, because clearly we're skipping some details here. I'm gonna need to get some deets on this guy when this whole thing is over, because I'm having trouble. Because it seemed like implied from the first one that as like kind of a noble type, he still wasn't that high up. He was like kind of on a lower, maybe middle rung of that sort of stuff. So the fact that he like asserts himself into this position, the fact that he's messing around this all around the monarchy and stuff like that, trying to play kingmaker and stuff, it implies a greater importance than I got from him. So maybe I'm just not understanding how important he was and how important his position was among all these things, perhaps.
Because this put him in contact with many powerful men. But even though, by all accounts, he was an effective member of the society, and even though he had amplified the conservative voice in Prussian politics by establishing a newspaper, when the liberal cause fell apart and the conservatives once again became ascendant, he was passed over for a cabinet position. They were very happy to use him when a radical was needed, but once the time came to re-establish order, the wild man was cast aside. So Bismarck
Okay, I get it. I guess I get that. So they liked him because he was like a good spokesperson. Okay, so that makes a little bit more sense and at least partially answers my question from earlier. I guess having the loudest voice is very helpful.
Witnessed the birth of his first child. But Bismarck had a plan. Bismarck always had a plan. You see, even though the liberals had failed to get anything like the constitution they had wanted, they had gotten a constitution, and with it, a parliament, the Landtag. And Bismarck, always a pragmatist under whatever colors he may have worn, decided to get himself elected to this new body. The fight was fierce. He knew that he wouldn't get elected in his own region, so he decided to run for office in the city of Brandenburg. But there he was an outsider.
I think in the previous one, I compared him to Hamilton, and there is something definitely there. Somebody who is skeptical of the mob, skeptical of potential democratic elements making their way in and having like the dirty poor people come in and start making decisions, that sort of stuff. So like I get that, but also one thing that I can look at, like, that's very similar between the two of them. Hamilton supported a bit more conservative of a constitution when time came to create a new constitution. He wanted something a little bit more conservative, a little closer to the British system, and in some ways even more conservative than the British system. And but when time came and then there was a new system, he didn't like waste time on that. He adapted to the new system and he made it work to his benefit. So being pragmatic, I guess, helps you go down in history, doesn't it?
Running against the local mayor, he acted with vigor, describing his campaign headquarters as a military camp, with messengers running in and out at all hours, and strategy being formulated so that he never missed an opportunity to speak to the few hundred men who would eventually determine the representative for Brandenburg. He won by 25 votes. Now he was once again at the center of things, and the question at hand on everybody's mind was the unification of Germany. If the 39 German states that had survived the Napoleonic invasion banded together, they could change the face of European politics forever.
Oh,
but
they
how
will,
to
though.
achieve that was a matter of some debate. They could either come together under Austria or under Prussia. But Austria rejected the possibility of unification because the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Habsburg-inherited lands included far more territory than just the German portions. And the whole point of unification was German nationalism. Germans would never accept rule by a sovereign who was also ruling over other nations.
I'm very curious about how this felt on like a person by person case when it came to the unification of Germany, because I know there's many different cultures that make up Germany as it became. So I'm wondering what sort of conflict there might have been there. Obviously, there is kind of a German identity that has existed long before an actual German state. But it makes me wonder what kind of subdivisions that may have existed that may have stood in the way of this sort of thing. Clearly, they end up getting that German state, but I don't know. It's something that I've always been curious about, on a very on the ground level rather than the politicians and stuff. The politicians are not always necessarily the best example of how ordinary people feel.
This meant that the Austrians would either have to divide their empire and give some other branch of the family their German territories, or simply reject unification outright, and they chose the latter. The German National Assembly, which was different from the Landtag in that it represented all German states, decided, with little other choice, to offer the imperial crown to Frederick Wilhelm. Nobles in the Landtag, including
Lovely.
Bismarck, urged him to accept. But the king rejected the proposal, and this allowed Bismarck the opportunity to rail against the constitution that would have come with it. He was blasted by the press, and sure of losing his seat in the next election. But when the king dissolved the Landtag, he changed the election rules for the next session in ways that favored landowners like Bismarck, which ensured his re-election. After giving
Lovely.
some blistering speeches on the role of the monarchy and
Oh yeah, when it came to him like winning by 25 votes a second ago, I was just thinking in the back of my head, like, is that a lot or is that very little? It depends on what the voting pool looks like, because I don't know what the qualifications for voting are.
ensured his re-election. After giving some blistering speeches on the role of the monarchy and some strong invectives against even the monarch's own move toward a constitutional unification, Bismarck got himself moved to the new assembly debating the question of unification. But before that could go anywhere, he got caught up in the next great conflict, The war over territory seemed to loom between Austria and Prussia, and it is here that we see the evolution of Bismarck. Because though in many ways he was and always would be a man of war, when a settlement was offered and many pushed to reject it and go to war instead, Bismarck rose and said, "It is unworthy of a great state to fight for something which does not concern its own interest. Gentlemen, show me an objective worthy of war, and I will go along with you." It is easy enough for a statesman to ride the popular wave from the comfort of his own fireside, making thunderous speeches from the rostrum, letting the public sound the trumpets of war, and leaving it to the musketeer, bleeding out his life's blood in the snowy wastes to settle whether policies end in glory or in failure. Nothing is simpler. But woe to any statesman who, at such a time, fails to find a cause of war which will stand up to scrutiny once the fighting is over. And so begins the transformation of Bismarck the Radical to Bismarck, man of realpolitik.
Yeah, that sounded like a much more moderate, level-headed figure than we've been introduced to so far. That's why I kind of want to read like a full biography of the guy, because it feels like we're just going from one stage to the next, and you have to like break it down into these little segments, but it doesn't really have the capacity to tell you about the little gray areas that get you from one segment to the next. It's so difficult to break down somebody's political transformation, somebody's just general maturity. Like, he is getting older at this point. Clearly, changes are going to happen. So I'm really interested in where this one is going to go. So we've got, I think, 6 parts in this one. I'm going to try to get around to the next part pretty soon, and hopefully I'll be able to crank them out a little bit more often. Sometimes I don't feel like it. Sometimes, like, this is one of those where I really feel like cranking out more, but I also want to make sure I do the other content that other people are interested in. Not everybody's interested in Otto von Bismarck. And to them, I ask, why not? He seems interesting enough. I don't know. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you tomorrow with another video.